Really? Hang on, wait. I thought this was meant to be a World War I film. Why are there ISO containers, oil drums and tyres everywhere? Why am I wearing 58 pattern and hiking trousers? What's going on here?
It's what the producers had from the last film.
The producers? What do they think? Do they think the audience is stupid?
Well, they think humans are too dumb enough to notice.
Wait, humans?
My money don't jiggle jiggle, it folds. I like to see you wiggle wiggle, for sure. It makes me wanna dribble dribble. You know, riding in my Fiat, you really have to see it.
So today we are up here at Gunman Tuddenham in the glorious sunshine, having a look at this, the S&T SMLE, or more precisely, the number 1 Mark III. Now before we dive on into this, I just want to quickly say, if you haven't already, please do consider subscribing to the channel and dropping a like and a comment down below. It really does help out. And if you really feel so inclined to do so, maybe share the video to help others find out about this lovely rifle. Right, with that out of the way, let's head on into the building to get out of the wind and talk about the history of the real steel SMLE. So, the SMLE, or the SMLE, or by its full name, the Short Magazine Lee Enfield. Why did I get one, and why is it so important? Well, for me, this is probably the most iconic rifle, and possibly the best service rifle, of the First World War. Let's dive onto the history a bit more. So, I mentioned the name, Short Magazine Lee Enfield. And no, that doesn't refer to the size of the magazine. It is in fact short, comma, magazine, comma, Lee Enfield. Now, the short section refers to the overall length of the rifle. And yes, while you look at it, you wouldn't think this is short, but for the time, at the very turn of the 20th century, this was considered a short service rifle. Now, the government of the day, the British government of the day, were very forward thinking in the fact that we needed one universal service weapon to equip all the troops. Beforehand, we'd had the magazine Lee Enfield and the Lee Metfords, which were about 6-7 inches longer than this rifle, and they equipped the infantry troops on the ground, and then they had shorter carbines, which equipped the cavalry of the day. And the government went, no, one rifle for both, and thus the SMLE was born. Now, that's the short part of the name. The magazine part refers to the fact that it has a magazine. And this is arguably the best magazine on a bolt action at the time. It was external, removable, and held 10 rounds. Compare that to the internal magazines on like the Springfield 1903, the Mausers and the Mosins of the time. You could hold much more ammunition in these, 10 rounds in this compared to I think 5 or 7 in the others. And they were removable. Now, the doctrine of the time wasn't as forward-thinking as the government, so there was one magazine per rifle, and they were loaded via stripper clips whilst installed in the rifle, and they're only meant to be removed to be cleaned. And in fact, some regiments went as far as to chain their magazines to the rifles so the soldiers wouldn't lose them. So that covers the S and M of Short Magazine Lee Enfield. What about the last bit, Lee Enfield? Well, that is the design name, and the Lee part refers to the designer of the action, a James Paris Lee, and the Enfield part, there's a bit of arguments about why it's called that. Some say it's because the Lee Enfields used the Enfield design rifling in the barrels, others say it's because Enfield were the design house for the Lee Enfield and the SMLE. A lot of people seem to agree that really the Enfield bit was added instead of the Metford bit, to distinguish the quite different design in rifles between the Lee Metford and the Lee Enfield series. So I've already mentioned that I think the SMLE was the best service rifle of World War I, and to add to that, we've already discussed about how the magazines, in my opinion, are superior. But the other major thing was the Lee action, which some people will argue the Mauser action's better. I personally think the Lee system worked a lot better. Now, there were two things that added up to make it a really good system. One, the bolt throw was only 60 degrees, as opposed to the Mauser system, or the Springfield, or the Mosin. They all required a 90-degree throw, which meant your cocking lever had to come all the way up and in front of your sight picture before you could rack the bolt. And two, the locking lugs were placed at the rear of the bolt, as opposed to up front. Now, you will lose a bit of accuracy doing that, but it meant you had a much shorter bolt throw Add to that, the bolt handle sat right by the trigger, which meant you could hold the bolt handle with your thumb and forefinger and work the trigger with your middle finger. You could get very rapid fire out of a bolt action rifle. In fact, some testimonies from German soldiers in the First World War stated that they thought they were under machine gun fire, when in actual fact they're up against a squad of Tommies equipped with the SMLE. Right, so we've covered the SMLE part of the name. Now the Mark III Star. And to do that, we need to talk about the Mark III. The Mark III was the bee's knees of rifle designs going into World War I. And it was designed for the previous war, as with everything in the military. So, it was designed for the plains of South Africa, with ranks of soldiers firing volley shots out over thousands of yards. Front rank, fire! However, it all changed when we got to the trenches in northern France. Suddenly, we weren't doing volley fire out to 1,000 yards. We weren't doing firing on officers' commands. It was every soldier making a snap decision to shoot or not shoot. And they decided that they could save some money and make some wartime economised versions. In comes the Mark III Star. They got rid of some of the fancy features on the sights, so these are no longer windage adjustable. The volley sights are completely gone, not needed for shooting 100-200 yards between trenches. And the magazine cut-off was gone. Soldiers were now on 10-round mags. And thus, the Mark III Star was born. And it stayed in service with the British Army for a long old time. In fact, most of the way into World War II. So, the BEF on the beaches of Dunkirk had the SMLE. But that's not the end of the story for the SMLE. We're still seeing it used today in pretty much every conflict around the globe. Prominently, it was seen in the hands of the Mujahideen against the Soviets in Afghanistan. We saw some of them in Vietnam, in the current war on terror. It's a long-lived rifle that still packs a punch and reaches out. Let's talk about the external features of this rifle. So before we can talk about the externals of the rifle, we need to get it out of the box. And what better time to talk about what comes in the box itself. So I'll be very quick here because after all it's just a box, but I quite like it. Sure, it's a bit big, but it doesn't have a big picture of a gun on it. It has a small one on the front, on the corner, and it has it on one of the small ends of the box, along with a load of other logos and stuff around the sides of the boxes. Lifting the lid off the box first reveals the instruction manual. It's actually really well made and is a fold-out A3 variety as opposed to a booklet. There's a lot of information with very detailed photos showing everything. However, some of the text is not the best English. For instance, cocking piece will be back by cocking the bolt and it will be down by pulling the trigger. But overall, it has all the information you need to know to use the Lee Enfield. Also, a nice addition is the inclusion of an exploded diagram with all of the parts labelled for the rifle. So in theory, you should be able to reach out to S&T and ask them for a Lee Enfield X34 and you'll get sent part of the end cap that holds the rifle together. Lifting the top piece of foam off, we can see the rifle in the box. It's quite nicely padded and it's not going to get damaged in shipping. And hang on a minute, I just need to... There we go, there's the Made in China sticker gone. Much better. And that's it really. There's the rifle and of course the magazine. But there's nothing else in the box, not even a cleaning and unjamming rod. Now, to be fair, it may have had one and it's fallen out, but that's highly unlikely. I just think, for the amount of money you're paying for this rifle, it would be nice to maybe have a speed loader, a second mag even, or tools to help service the rifle. But nope, you just get the rifle and the magazine. So seeing as we have the rifle on the table already, let's grab the scales and see how much it weighs. And with the mag installed and the scales settled, it comes out at 3.045 kilograms, which is about 900 grams lighter than the real SMLE according to Wikipedia. I think that's a pretty good middle ground to hit because it reduces the weight a bit, make it a bit easier to skirmish with, but also it's still got the heft to it and feels pretty close to the real weight. Obviously that difference probably comes from the use of alloys instead of steel in the construction of the rifle. Now onto the externals of the rifle, and let's start with the big one, and that is the wood. And yes, on this, everything that should be wood is wood. Now, some people have noted that the colour is very red. I think it comes across as more red in photos than it is in real life. However, I agree with most people that it probably should be a slightly different colour. But hey, it's wood, you can refinish it yourself and change it to the colour of your desire. Overall, the quality of the wood is pretty good. However, it's very evident that they've used a surface finish to really darken up the wood and gloss it up. So as soon as you start getting scrapes and bumps, it's very noticeable where they are because it reveals a much lighter base wood underneath. Now the construction of this rifle uses 3 types of metal. The receiver and pretty much all of the fixings up towards the front of the rifle are made out of alloy and finished to look like blued steel, and they've done a really good job on the finish. The butt pad is again alloy and made to look like a brass butt pad. However, as it's worn and got scraped during use, it's quite evident that it is not brass. However, from a distance away, it looks absolutely fine. And finally, there are a few steel parts on the rifle, namely the cylinder, the rear sight protector, and a couple of screws, bolts and adjustment knobs that make up the rest of the rifle. Coming back to the butt plate, it also has a cap in it which gives you access to what would be the cleaning kit compartment. However, its main feature on this rifle is to give you access to the stock attachment screw. Coming forward to the receiver of the rifle, we've got quite a lot going on here, but we'll quickly run through it. Let's go top to bottom, starting off with the charger bridge and the thumb cutout for loading. No purpose in Airsoft, but nice to see. Inside the receiver we find our steel cylinder, and attached to that we have our mock ejector, so that as we cycle the bolt there is an ejector piece that moves with it. Now speaking of cycling the bolt, this is done with our bolt handle, which is nice and easy to operate and feels very solid and not like it's going to break off the cylinder. The bolt handle assembly is pinned onto the cylinder, not crimped, so I doubt that's going to break under most builds. Behind that we find our cocking piece, which actually works like a real cocking piece, kind of, as in when you rack the bolt, the cocking piece stays back. When you pull the trigger, it flies forward like it's about to hit the percussion cap of a round. I just love that. Also on the top of the receiver, to the left hand side, we find our safety. It's forward for fire, backwards for safe. Very easy to work with the thumb of your right hand, shooting right-handed. Bit more of a hassle to work with your left hand, but hey, the rest of the rifle is a hassle to work with your left hand. Coming down the wrist of the rifle, we find a couple of really nice markings. Not quite accurate, but pretty good. And below that we find our trigger and our magazine release. And that mag holds, according to the manual, 35 rounds. However, I only ever load 30 into mine, and the rifle will work nicely, and hopefully it will increase the length of time before any parts break in my rifle. Coming forward from the receiver, on the right hand side of the rifle we find a small cutout for our hop adjust. Very easy access, however I find it a bit too easy, and usually my support hand tends to rest very close to it and occasionally knocks it off of the right setting. Coming forwards again, we find that steel piece, the rear sight protector, and between that, funnily enough, we find the rear sight. As I said earlier, this is the Mark III Star, so no windage adjustment, but 2 modes of elevation adjustment, both the coarse push button and slide, like your AK sight, and also a fine adjust knob on the other side to slide it forward and back ever so slightly. Coming forwards again, we find our barrel band with our front sling loop attached to it, and if we follow the sling down, we find our rear sling loop right at the butt of the rifle. Now, coming to the front of the rifle, we find possibly the most distinctive feature of the SMLE, and that is its nose cap, which contains the front sight protectors, the muzzle, and the bayonet lugs, as well as our stacking ring, which is used not as a front sling loop, but to stack 3 rifles together to form a tripod, so squaddies could leave their rifles in a easy access state, not in the mud, while they got on with digging trenches or having a brew. Now, I mentioned the muzzle. There are no forms of threads on this, so you're probably not going to be able to add that uber tactical tracer or suppressor that you wanted. And I also mentioned our front sight protectors. In between that is our front sight. A singular cast piece looks right, however the real ones have 2 pieces, so you can take out your front sight and adjust it left and right for windage, or put in taller or shorter ones to adjust your elevation aim. So overall, I'm very happy with the external features of the rifle. Picking it up, it doesn't feel like a toy. It does almost feel like a real SMLE, and my only gripes are the wood finish is not quite how I'd like it, but that's something I can fix. And stock has loosened and got quite wobbly. Again, something I can fix, but just a tad bit annoying. But how usable is it? As I've already said, it's very easy to work the bolt right-handed, but let's say you come to a doorway like so and have to use it left-handed. Suddenly things get a bit tricky because I can't use my trigger hand easily to work the bolt. You've got a couple of options, I guess. First, you can take it out of your shoulder, work it, and then bring it back up. Or you can keep it in your shoulder and come over and try and work it. Or you can do the forgotten weapons technique of using your support hand, like so. And with a bit of practice, you can get pretty quick at doing it. I personally am not practiced. Overall though, I think this rifle can be used in a skirmish. You're obviously going to be at quite a disadvantage compared to AEG or gas blowback or HPA users, but it makes it all the more satisfying when you do get kills. The magazines hold 30 rounds, so you're not short of ammo for a bolt action, and magazine changes can be done quite quickly, as the magazine release is right here next to your trigger. But speaking of that, occasionally when I've had my finger in the trigger guard, I've accidentally dropped my mag and then I've had to fumble around to find it and put it back in. So, enough of the usability, let's jump on over to the range and see how this performs. Got a mag full of 3s, and I know I'm not wearing eye pro, I'm the only one here, and I'd rather be able to see in the low light with my proper glasses so I can actually get a half decent grouping for you guys, as opposed to wear my other glasses and not get shot in the face anyway because I'm only here on my own, and then not make a good grouping. So let me just quickly walk you through it with the scope cam as well. Got the cardboard target at 30 meters. We'll take a couple of grouping shots at the oil barrel to the left of it. We've got the oil drum standing up at 40 meters, and we've got the oil drums on their sides at 50 meters, and then for the hell of it we've got the oil bunker out at 65 meters. Now this is doing under a duel and we're using 0.3, so I doubt we're going to get that far, but we'll give it a go. So let me get in a comfy shooting position, preferably not sitting on my car keys, and let's crack on with a 5-round grouping on the paper target. But before that, we'll just get our aim in a bit. One. Two. Three. Yes. 4. 5. Now that missed, I swayed, so it would have gone to the right of it. That's my bad, my knee wobbled, not the rifle, so that's why I took the 6th shot, 5 on the target. Now we'll just go check 40 meters. 1, 2, 3. God, I'm having a bad time with this today. 4, 5. Yeah, you can put rounds on at 40 meters fairly reliably. That is, of course, unless you're a crap shot like me. Now let's try 50 meters. Okay, that one went a bit low. Low. Same up again. That framed up too much. So 50 meters, 50-50. Also, we may be able to hit the oil drum, but it sounds very weak. So if it's a player at 50 and they're wearing any kind of kit, they're probably not going to feel the hit. Anyway, let's try 65 meters. I think 65 metres is probably pushing it a bit too much. So the performance of it is okay, but not exceptional, which I kind of wished it was for the price I paid for it. So we were able to make a 5-round group on an A4 piece of paper at 30 metres, consistently hit a man-sized target at 40 metres, and somewhat accurately hit targets at 50 metres. Wasn't the best. Now, to be fair to the rifle, that wasn't the original stock configuration. I actually broke it the first time I used it, so that had a new hop-up rubber in it, but I tried to pick the most similar hop-up rubber to the stock one that I could find. But the power is right down. So with 0.3 gram BBs, which is what we were using, the joule output works out at 0.65 joules, which on a 0.2 gram BB works out at 260 FPS. So we're right down on the power, but still able to push out to about 50 meters. Now I have now done some upgrades to the rifle. Since then, I've put in a shorter barrel and I've put in a maple leaf hop-up rubber, and now nothing else changed. It's putting out 0.36 gram BBs at 1.05 joules, which is still under AEG limits, and it's able to hit targets at 30, 40, 50 and even 65 meters fairly consistently. And trying to really reach out, the BBs were dropping just short of the 85 meter targets. So with some minor tuning and probably 40 more pounds or 50 more pounds it's spent on a new barrel, a new hop-up rubber, and maybe changing to a TML 96 style spring for a slightly smooth bolt pull, you can really up the performance of the rifle and make it a really good performer. But why didn't they do that out of the box? Now, speaking of actual performance, here's a couple of clips of me using it in game, but be warned, I'm not that good with it. So this first clip shows me advancing towards enemy positions. I just thought I'd put it in because you can see I can clearly work the bolt, transition between targets and keep up a decent rate of fire with it. This second clip is of an empty mag and reload. I think it's fairly smooth. Obviously it's not super fast AR operator style, but then again I'm being careful with my mag. Now this third clip is showing what I talked about earlier, how occasionally I managed to drop the mag out when I didn't want to, and here you can see me realise quite quickly and grab that mag. Now this fourth clip is to show how you can keep the rate of fire even whilst running towards enemy position. I don't hit anyone, but I think I scared someone. And finally, for a laugh, here it is with my bayonet attached doing some CQB work. So I mentioned I'd done some upgrades to my rifle. Let's have a quick look at the internals, and then I can show you what parts I think need to be switched out to really up the performance of the rifle. So we're going to start with the rifle taken down to this point already. If you want to see how to do this, there are already videos on my channel of me taking the rifle down to this point, so check them out here. But the reason we're stopping here is because I wanted to talk about this, the upper rear handguard. Notice how this is a different colour to this. That's because this isn't the original piece. This is. And as you can see, it's cracked and I've had to glue it back together. So we can see two metal clips. Now originally this one had both these clips on, with the second one being screwed into this hole here. When I first took this apart, I lifted this off and this piece cracked. And I didn't notice it cracked until I put it back on the rifle and it split in two. So the reason this piece broke is because you had two metal clips that were transferring force between themselves through a very thin bit of wood and along the grain of the wood. So when this was fitted and was being removed, you were putting all of that removal force along this little bit of wood, which is not very good, and that's why it's split. So with this new bit of wood, I've opted to only put one of the clips on to stop that torque loading. Sure, it means it will have a tiny bit of side-to-side wobble to it, but I'd much rather have a little bit of wobble on a non-important piece as opposed to a broken piece. Now what I don't get is why S&T didn't copy the real SMLE mounting method, which is this single piece with the 2 clip points. So with the hop up and barrel removed from the receiver, we can have a look at the compression of the cylinder. So this is already cocked. In fact, we'll look at it this way. So then you can see how far the piston travels. I've blocked the nozzle and well, that's stock. I'd say that's pretty good for a stock piston. Okay, so here's the cylinder taken apart. We've got a cast spring guide with, some people call it a spring spacer, I call it a washer. In theory, I guess you could run without it and drop the FPS of your rifle slightly. However, I find it just helps minimise wear on the parts. We then have a piston. I believe this is aluminium. It's not steel, but it is metal. There we go. No magnetic traction there. With a ported piston head and an O-ring. Looking at the back of the piston, I'm assuming this is a 90-degree sear. Having a look at the cylinder head, we've got a servo pad, and you can see where the piston has been resting against it. And we have a single O-ring. But again, it's giving really good air seal, and it is producing good results with the new spring and the new barrel and hop rubber I've put in. Also, here's a close-up look at my loading fin. That little bit of damage there was caused by the jam that I had the first time I used the rifle, but since then it's had a couple of thousand rounds through it and has worked really nicely, and I have no issues with it. That being said, some people have broken theirs and have managed to replace them by buying a TML96 style fin and modifying it to match the profile of this fin. I found that this spring, for some reason, bows quite a bit and can cause the bolt pull to be grindy and lock up. So I got rid of that and replaced it with this. This is TML96 spec M130 spring. It's actually longer than the stock one, but it hasn't bowed and it gives really nice smooth smooth bolt pulls. So having a quick look at the trigger box, we can find our 90-degree sear at the top. Now, just to say quickly, I have modified this to make it slightly easier to use when you're doing tech work. There was originally a out of battery safety, which is this piece. It would run in that slot there, up and down on that spring, and would stop you being able to pull the trigger when the bolt is not seated forward and in the locked position. Just doing the old steel test with the motor. The trigger is not steel. Obviously the screws that hold it together are. However, the most important parts, which is the sear and the dowels that the sear runs on and the springs are on, they are all steel. So that's good to see. So I've put one side of the trigger box off so you can see it. We've got our trigger here. It actuates this transfer bar here, which pops out of the way downwards and lets the piston pull the sear forwards and fly off to fire the shot. Also, we can see that this linkage here, when the trigger is pulled, pulls that down and lets our cocking indicator or cocking piece fly forwards. Overall, quite a nicely designed trigger box. The hop-up chamber itself seems to be VSR 10 in style, got a side adjust. Now I've put these markings on because there were none beforehand, but forwards for less hop, back for more hop, and you can see it moves the arm up and down ever so slightly. This isn't anything to write home about, it's a cast hop-up chamber, but it seems to do the job quite nicely, and other than me knocking the hop arm or knocking the hop slider, it seems to hold its hop pretty well. So the stock barrel is brass. It has pretty decent crowning on the end of it, and it's a windowed VSR style design. It's a bit annoying because whilst it works with stock rubbers and standard nubs, it does mean that you can't use Maple Leaf rubbers with it or R-hop equivalent style rubbers with this as it is. Now it is modifiable. You can remove this bridge and make it an open back. Like most VSR or gas blowback style barrels, that does require you taking either a saw or a grinder to the back of the barrel. Looking down the bore of the barrel, there's nothing really to write home about. It's not super polished, nor is it too bad. It's a decent brass barrel, but it's far too long for the cylinder, which is why I've switched out for this much shorter Maple Leaf Crazy Jet and a Maple Leaf MR hop rubber in here. Now this would have had the Maple Leaf MR hop arm put in it, but for some reason when I tried it with this in, even with it set to minimum power, it's overhopping 4.5s. So that's out for the time being. I might have a look at redesigning this piece myself and 3D printing it to just give it a bit less hop. For now, I'm just using the standard arm and getting good results. So as I've shown there, I've done a couple of minor tweaks to the rifle and it is now performing much better. Now obviously if you're going to try and make a sniper out of this, you'd want to up the power, so you'd be looking at an M150 or up for this, but that small cylinder volume doesn't really lend itself well to very heavyweight and very high power builds, unfortunately. But if you want to use it as a battle rifle and be up close and personal with it, then yes, you can build it to perform at AEG limits both in the UK and elsewhere, like 400 FPS this would be absolutely fine with. So we've seen the features, the performance and the internals of this rifle. Let's just have a quick chat about some of my favourite parts of it. First of all, massive shout out to S&T for actually making it out of wood. Now I know some people, myself included, feel like the colour's not quite what we want, but that's the lovely thing about wood. You can sand it down and refinish it as you like. And you can see this top piece I've already made to look like walnut. And after this review's filmed, all of this will be sanded down, refinished, and hopefully give it this lovely walnut finish. The other parts I really like is the fact that they've actually put the magazine in the right place. Sure, it means you've got this complicated feeding mechanism, but this isn't meant to be a sniper. This is a service rifle, and it might go wrong in the future, but I just love the fact that it adds that bit of realism. Now, speaking of realism, that bolt to me, and that bolt throw just feels clunky and right, and it sounds right, and it has this lovely working cocking piece, which I just think adds that extra little touch that just makes it just that much more believable of being a really nice SMLE. It almost feels like proper steel on steel, despite the fact that the receiver and most of the metalwork on the rifle is actually cast alloy, and that's down to S&T's lovely finishing that they've come up with to make it look like blued steel. I think it's a happy compromise to keep the costs down and keep the weight down a bit so it's skirmishable for the majority of players while still looking the absolute mutts nuts. But now that we've talked about the good parts of the rifle, let's talk about a couple of the issues that I have with it. So I've already mentioned it as one of my favourite parts, but it's also one of the little niggles, and that is the finish of the wood. It's quite red, and I feel like it's a bit too perfect. So for me, it's going to need to be tweaked to get it to look really, really good. Also, you may have noticed that I have a different piece of wood on here, and as we spoke about when I tore it down, that's because the original broke. And S&T, why did you do it like that? All you had to do was design the clip slightly differently and that would have been perfect, and that really, really annoyed me. Also, my stock is a bit loose and wobbly, which I understand screws can loosen over time, and it was a lot stiffer when I got it, but to fix it I need an Allen key that would reach here from here down a tiny little hole. I don't have one of those. They're really hard to come by. Why didn't you just put one in the pack with the rifle? Or better yet, make the bolt longer so you can actually get it with a normal length Allen key. And finally, more of a personal gripe than a rifle gripe, I don't really get on with leaf sights. I find them really hard to use, and I much prefer aperture sights, like on a number 4. Now that's on me, because the SMLE has always had leaf sights, but I'm the idiot who bought it. Still, it's not all sunshine and daisies when it comes to the S&T SMLE. So, what are my overall thoughts on the S&T SMLE? Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you S&T for bringing a working Lee Enfield to the airsoft market. I know there's been a lot of people waiting a long time for one, and we've got one. And well, I really like it. Sure, it has some foibles and bits that break, but overall it's a really nice rifle. But would I recommend you pick up one? Well, it depends. Are you a fan of all things British? Then probably yes. Do you want a World War I or World War II airsoft loadout? Again, yes. Are you looking for a reliable backup to be an Op 4 weapon at pretty much any event? Again, probably yes. But are you looking to be the next latest and greatest airsoft sniper? Well, maybe not. But overall, all I can say is I highly recommend the S&T SMLE Mark III Star.